So if you are prepping, you are probably asking yourself, how on earth do I store all of the food I need? And I am here to tell you it's probably not in Mylar bags when you're first getting started. So today we're going to talk about how to store our food. And what I really want us to do is to focus on some probably more straightforward ways to store short-term food. This does not cover all of the ways that we store food in our emergency preparedness plan, but it gives you the baseline for how to store food for that 30-day emergency kind of situation. Welcome back to part 2 of the short-term food storage video series. I'm glad you're back. If you haven't had a chance to do so already, I'm going to put a link up here really quickly on what you should be storing. Please go watch that video first before you watch this one, because I think it will really help lay the foundation for you. Today, we're going to talk about practical ways for you to store your food so that you know that it is ready in any kind of emergency situation. Now, the beauty of the short-term food storage plan that I have created for you is that 30-day supply of food is going to be food that you are constantly rotating, because it's going to be meals that you are already eating for the most part. Probably one of the most important things you can think about in your food storage is just that rotation piece, right? It is getting the food that you are buying and not just sticking it in a corner and leaving it and then coming back 6 months or a year later or 2 years later and realizing that it's expired. You want that constant rotation. And again, the beauty of the plan that I have recommended is that you are using menu items that you are already in your day-to-day rotation of cooking. And so you're not going to have the same challenges about storing the food as maybe you would if you're just storing things that you're only eating in an emergency situation, right? So after you've made your meal list from part 1 of the series, you may realize that you have some things in those recipes that you like that are not as stable as maybe you were hoping they would be. And so today, kind of the other piece that I want to talk about in terms of how to store is just thinking about how we used canned goods, frozen items, dehydrated food, and maybe freeze-dried food to really supplement that food storage that we have going. Canned goods are probably one of the easiest things for us to store. Again, they have a pretty long shelf life. You can get a variety of foods in them. We all are probably eating diced tomatoes and tomato sauce and beans out of cans already. And again, vegetables are another great thing to store in those canned goods because you can get that rotation and that little bit longer shelf life. If you have a lot of recipes that you made on that first part of the video series where you realize you have a lot of fresh ingredients, you're going to want to look at ways to kind of maybe substitute some of that fresh stuff for either canned goods or frozen or dehydrated or freeze-dried. I also like to stock up on frozen food because I think frozen food, again, just gives us a little bit more longevity and it gives us a place to go to be able to kind of reach back into. Yes, I know there's some concerns with losing power. We have backup solar generators that we would use to keep cycling our fridge and our freezer, and so I am able to still use frozen food as part of my long-term storage option. We'll talk about all of that again in some video down the road, but thinking about frozen food just even for normal day-to-day stuff is great because frozen vegetables and frozen fruit are frozen at the peak of their ripeness when they are definitely in the highest vitamin contents, and it is a great way to get those vegetables and that fruit in without having to buy the produce straight off the shelf. If you haven't used a lot of frozen vegetables or frozen fruit, I would start working those into your normal rotation. You don't necessarily have to rotate those quite as often. You can still get fresh vegetables and fresh fruit most of the time, but for a couple of meals a week, I would try to use your frozen stuff so that you can, 1, get in the habit of cooking with it, and 2, rotate out your stuff in your freezer. So when we use our freezer, we really use our freezer for meat, vegetables, and fruit. It's a great way to kind of extend the shelf life, if you will, of some of those things that maybe you would love to buy fresh each week, but might not be an option in an emergency situation. We love using our food saver bags to really kind of pre-package meat. So when we buy meat in bulk at Sam's or Costco, we put it into individual servings, and then we use our food saver to really seal that up and give us a little bit of longevity in terms of the freshness of that meat. All right, so now in addition to canned food and frozen food, we also like to use dehydrated food. So here is a great example of dehydrated food that we would keep in our short-term emergency food storage, and then again, also in our longer-term food storage as well. You can get commercially dehydrated food, or you can buy a dehydrator and dehydrate your own food. One of the things we love to do is to take frozen vegetables and dehydrate them and then can them. And then this keeps them protected from moisture and air and really allows us to save a lot of vegetable in a pretty small amount of space. So this is another great option kind of as you move forward. It's a little bit more advanced than just keeping canned good and frozen food, but it is a great way for you to extend the life of your vegetables, your fruit, and sometimes even meat can be dehydrated if you do like jerky type stuff. That is another option for dehydrating meals that you can use kind of for your family. The last option is just to use freeze-dried foods. And again, we talked a little bit about freeze-dried foods in the first video of how I use these as kind of like fast food meals when they're already prepackaged. But there is another option for freeze-dried food, which is individual kind of elements. So for instance, I have freeze-dried green beans, I have freeze-dried peas and carrots and things like that. Freeze-dried vegetables and fruit are a great way to give you access to those foods that maybe on a normal basis you would just be buying fresh at the grocery store. And you know that if an emergency situation happens, you won't be able to have access to them. I love freeze-dried foods for that. You don't need tons if you're creating a 7-day meal plan and you know that you're eating green beans, again, 1 can may be enough for your family. So this has 20 servings of green beans in one number 10 can. You can find all sorts of freeze-dried food. Again, if you're going to use freeze-dried food in your storage, I would recommend practicing cooking with it before an emergency situation happens. So for instance, I use freeze-dried food in my chicken pot pie recipe that I would make. And I have practiced making my normal chicken pot pie recipe, which I normally make with either canned vegetables or frozen vegetables. I've practiced making it with my freeze-dried vegetables too, just to understand how it works. And I will tell you, I had to adjust the liquids in my pot pie. There took a little bit of a learning curve. So if you're going to use freeze-dried food, go ahead and make the investment and buy an extra can of all of this stuff that you're going to get so you can practice cooking with it, because there is a little bit of a learning curve with that. And just like I mentioned in the first video, if you're using freeze-dried food, you're going to want to make sure that you have increased that water storage as well, because freeze-dried food takes water to kind of reconstitute. So you're going to need extra water from what you would normally need. And the last thing I want to talk about is just dairy items, okay? So when we think about a lot of our meals that we cook with have cheese or sour cream or milk. Those can be a little bit harder to store for a short-term emergency and definitely for a longer-term emergency. So Horizon Organic Milk has little cartons of milk in what they call retort packages. Retort packages are shelf stable. So this is milk that is shelf stable. I think it lasts for about 6 months, if I remember correctly, maybe up to a year. So again, it's going to give you the ability to store milk in a shelf-stable form. Now, again, I would encourage you to use this kind of on a regular basis if this is something that you're going to use to cook in, or at least make sure that you really know when this is going to expire and start using it in your recipes when it gets close to the expiration date, and then just restock it. But retort milk and the little pouches or packages is a great way to have dairy on hand that could get you through an emergency situation without having refrigeration. So that's really important. Same thing with cheese. I don't know about you, but I love cheese. And so we do store some freeze-dried cheese. And again, that gives us the opportunity to add cheese to our recipes, but not have to worry about having refrigeration or anything like that. These are great options for your dairy. You can also get things like eggs and butter in these freeze-dried packages, where it gives you a little bit more flexibility on the recipes that you make. Again, this is more advanced. This is not necessarily what you need to run out and get for your first 30 days if you're just getting started. So that's it for video number 2 on how to store your food. I want you guys to just do me a favor, drop a comment below, tell me something that you learned on this video, and give me a question that you have about food storage so I can address it in one of the next videos. If you haven't done so already, you can click the link above and see the first video on what to store and how to create your meal plan. And again, next week I'll be posting another video on where to store all this food that you are buying. Until next time, guys, let's be prepared, not scared.